the founding fathers gave us the jury system and enshrined it in the Constitution that you had to have a trial decided by a jury, where your guilt or innocence was decided by a jury. They inherited that from the English common law system. And if you'll think about why they did that and juxtapose that against the way it's done now, you will see what happens is the system, those who run the system, the control freaks, I should say, who run the system, have found a way to nullify the founding fathers' intent of having a jury system. You still have the form of a jury system. It can still act as a jury at times when they allow it to, but if they don't want it to, if there's ever a time the state wants to try somebody on charges that are a stretch, maybe they have a good defense, but it's not a defense that the system wants put forth, they can rig it so that even though you technically still have a jury, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything because the jury is not allowed to operate the way the founders intended them to when they developed the jury system. They wanted the jury to decide not only the question of the law, but also whether the law itself was being fairly applied. Were they just digging up some 200-year-old law to make a special case against this person and then selectively use it to prosecute people they don't like, but not use it when one of their friends does the same thing? And they were allowed to take that into account and say, this case is bogus. Technically, he broke this arcane law that's 200 years old that they haven't used, but no one has been following that law for 200 years. You guys have just dusted it off because you don't like this person. And so the jury is there to keep the state from doing things like that. And also they can judge the law itself. If the law is unjust, if it's an unjust law, they can say, you know what, we're going to find them not guilty because this law is terrible. The law is immoral. And juries could do that until the system decided, you know what, we don't like people having that much freedom. We don't like having power so decentralized. We like being able to step on whoever we want to step on. And so here's how they change things with a jury. First of all, they have the judge ask them, do you think you can put aside, if it's a controversial case where it involves an issue where maybe the law is bad or whether the person is doing something good, but they broke the law in the course of doing something good, and the system doesn't see it as good. They want to hammer them. They want to put them in prison for the rest of their life. And so they have the judge say to the jurors, are you able to put aside your morals and principles and vote solely on what I tell you the letter of the law means? The judge asks that question. And if they say, yes, I can put aside my morals and convictions, then you're being judged by a jury. It's put aside its morals and convictions. And that may not be your peers. If you have morals and convictions, how is that your peers? They've said, yes, I can put aside my morals and convictions and just go by what you tell me the law means. Well, that undermines the entire point of having a jury. You might as well not even have a jury. You might as well go back to having the judge decide innocence or guilt, because what's happening is the system is defining the game so that the juror can only act in the boundaries the judge gives them to think in. And that undermines the whole point of having a jury, and that's what they're trying to do. They don't like it that they've got these jurors that can say, you know what, you guys are abusing the law here. We're going to vote not guilty. This law stinks. This law isn't good. We're going to vote not guilty. We're not going to convict anybody under this law. They don't like that. They want to pass a zillion laws so that everybody's breaking the law somehow, and then they want to selectively prosecute and then tell the jury, now, put aside your sense of right and wrong here, put aside your judgment, put aside your morals, and judge just by whether they broke this law as the judge describes it to you. You see that what they've done? They've undermined the jury system. To fix it, Really, it should be, if a judge asks a juror that, can you put aside your morals, principles, and convictions and rule strictly according to the law and not judge the law? I think there should be grounds for mistrial. The judge should not, it's improper for the judge to ask that question, because part of the answer, that's part of the reason we have juries in the first place. What they're trying to do is circumvent the safeguard of the jury put in by the founding fathers to keep the state in check, to keep the state from passing bad laws. So that's one thing. They should not be able to do that. And the other thing is what the jury is even allowed to hear. The way we have it now, if you break the law and you think you have a constitutional defense, you first have to tell the judge that defense, and the judge will say whether or not you can bring it before the jury. So the jury still makes the decision, but they're mushrooms. They're fed in the dark. They're kept in the dark, and they're fed manure. So you may not even be able to make a defense at all. If your defense was, I had a constitutional right to do X, Y, and Z, it says so in the Constitution right here, and the judge says, I'm not going to allow that defense, then you just have to sit there and say nothing. The prosecutor lays out their case, you don't have an answer, and you get convicted, even though you had a constitutional defense. So that's another thing we need to do to fix this. A defendant should always be allowed to argue a constitutional defense, and the jury can decide whether that defense is sufficient or not. The judge should not take away the jury's job and really duty to hear that person's defense before they lock them in prison. It's so insidious the way they've kept the form of the jury, but they've taken all the power out of it, because they define the question and define the choices and define what the jury wants to hear, so that they never hear what the defendant wants to say. So that's two changes that we need to make. They've slipped these changes in over time to where the judge can ask the jury, will you put aside your morals and your principles and just rule on what I say the letter of the law is in this case? They started asking that question. They should have never been allowed to ask that question. That question is always undermining and short-circuiting the founders' intent for why we had a jury in the first place. It should be grounds for mistrial every time. And secondly, everyone should be allowed to use a constitutional defense. The judge should not be able to say, I'm going to rule that you can't use this defense. I'm going to rule you can't use that defense. No, a constitutional defense should always be allowable. And if the person wants to make another defense that is not a constitutional defense, they should at least have 1 day to make it. They shouldn't have to. The judge shouldn't be able to say, oh, you've got 8 or 9 defenses that you could use against this law and how terrible it is. I rule you can't use any of them. So you've just got to sit there and listen to our prosecutor rip on you, and then the jury will make their decision based on how I tell them they ought to think. It's a farce. It's a joke. It would be a joke if it wasn't so serious. People are being sentenced to prison for years, and it's going to get worse. And our court system is becoming just perverse. It's perverse and unjust. So those are two changes we need to make just to have a court system that isn't perverted. Because right now our court system and our so-called justice system is anything but. Thank you for listening.